Hello and welcome to another section of this complete NgRx state management course. In this section, we are going to learn all about NgRx Entity. And in this lecture, we are going to have a high-level overview of what is NgRx Entity and when we should use it. NgRx Entity is a library that comes as a part of NgRx ecosystem, and it is designed to simplify the management of collection of entities in your application state. So when I say entity, I mean the classes or interfaces like users, products, posts, courses, etc. So NgRx Entity, it provides a standardized way to manage CRUD operations and optimize performance when dealing with large data sets of entities. So remember that we use NgRx Entity in order to perform CRUD operation on entities like users, products, courses, etc. We can also perform CRUD operations without NgRx Entity, as we have seen in our previous lectures. But when we use NgRx Entity to perform CRUD operation, it basically simplifies the logic. And we will see that practically in our coming lectures. So remember that NgRx Entity provides a structured way to manage entity collections. It also provides utility functions to reduce boilerplate in reducer functions. So for example, let's say I want to add a new course. For that, in the reducer function, I will have to write that logic manually. But when we use NgRx Entity, it provides us built-in methods to perform the save operation. So we will not have to write the boilerplate code of adding a new course in the courses state manually. Instead, we can use the inbuilt method to perform the same operation. In the same way, NgRx Entity also provides built-in methods for selectors for accessing entities. We will also see this practically in our coming lectures. And NgRx Entity stores entities in a normalized format. What do we mean by that? So far what we have done is we have created a state and we have initialized it with some initial value. So for example, in our application, we have a courses state, which is initially an empty array. And whenever a new course is added, it gets added to that array. Now here, since we are using an array to store all our courses, it has some disadvantages. First of all, when we are storing all our courses in an array, if I want to select a course, for that, I will have to loop over each element of this courses array until I find that course. And this basically impacts the performance of the application. Currently in this courses array, we have only 3 courses. But in a real world application, we can have thousands or 10,000s of courses. So at that time, selecting a single course from an array can impact the performance of the application, because there it will have to loop through each element of the array until it finds the course which we are looking for. Also, when we are using an array to store the entity data like courses, in that case, we will have to write our own boilerplate code in order to add a new course to this array, or delete a course from this array, or update a course in this array. And if we have multiple entities like courses, so for example, let's say we also have lessons entity in our application, and we also have posts entity in our application. So for all those entities, in order to perform the CRUD operation, we will have to write the same type of logic. And in this way, the code becomes repetitive. So this is another disadvantage. But when we use NgRx Entity, instead of storing the entity data inside an array, it stores it inside an entity. So in the previous slide, when we are creating this initial state of type course state, there we are specifying the state name, which is courses, which is storing an array. But when we use NgRx Entity, we still have the course state, but this course state, it extends the entity state. Now what it does is, behind the scenes, it creates an object like this, an entity object. And in that object, we will have two properties, IDs and entities. This IDs is going to store all the IDs of the course which we have created. And this entities, it is going to store an object, and in that object, we will have the courses like a key value pair. The ID of the course will be the key, and the course object will be the value for that key. So for each course object, its ID will be used as key in this entity's object, and the entire course object will be the value. In this way, we have several advantages. The first advantage is if we have to select a single course, we can simply pass the ID of that course. So for example, if I want to select the third course, I can use the ID of that course to select that course. Here, we will not have to loop over each course object, each key value pair to select the desired course. We can simply specify the ID of the course and we can directly fetch its value. So in this way, first of all, it improves the performance of our application. And second, when we use NgRx Entity, as I have mentioned before, it provides us some built-in methods to perform CRUD operation inside the reducer function. And it also provides some selector methods to select an entity state. So we don't have to write the boilerplate code manually. Instead, we can use the built-in methods for that. And remember that here the course data, the course objects, they are not stored inside an array. Instead, it is stored inside an entity object which has two properties, IDs, which store the ID of each of the course. So here I am taking an example of course entity, but this is true for all other entities. So if you have product entities, in that case, this IDs will store the ID of each product, and this entities will store each product as a key value pair, where the ID of the product will be used as the key and the entire product object will be used as the value for that key. And this IDs array is important because this IDs array store the ID of each of the entity. It can be product entity, course entity, posts entity, etc. And it stores that key in the order in which you have sorted your entities. So now let's see some of the advantages of using NgRx entity. So as I have mentioned before, manually writing the reducers and selectors for common CRUD operations on collections can become very repetitive and error prone. But when we use NgRx entity, it provides pre-built methods for performing CRUD operations. And this drastically reduces the amount of code you need to write and maintain. Also, by storing entities in a dictionary, so basically we are storing data as a key value pair where the ID of the entity will be used as the key and the entire entity will be used as the value. So when we store entities like that, NgRx entity ensures that you are working with a normalized state. This means that there is no redundant data. That means you cannot create two entities with the same key. You cannot create two courses with the same ID, or you cannot create two products with the same ID. So NgRx entity ensures that you are working with a normalized state, and it also makes sure that update to a single entity only affect that specific entity. And by doing this, it prevents unnecessary re-renders for components that depend on other parts of the collection. Then when you search an entity using its ID, that operation will be very fast and it will improve the performance of your application. Because here, since the data is stored as a dictionary, we do not have to do any kind of iteration to find the desired data. Then, as I have mentioned before, when we use NgRx entity, we can use entity adapters, which provides pure functions that takes the current state and the data to be modified, and it returns a new immutable state. And for this, it provides built-in functions. And this makes your reducer cleaner, more concise, and less prone to mutation bugs. And we will see that practically in our coming lectures. Also, when we use NgRx entity, it encourages best practices for managing collection by enforcing a consistent structure and providing a standardized API for common operations. And this leads to more maintainable and predictable code base, especially in larger teams. Now let's talk about entity adapter. So when we use NgRx entity, there we also use entity adapter. And entity adapter is the utility object that provides us the built-in methods which we can use inside a reducer function to perform CRUD operation on the entity, as well as it also provides the built-in methods to be used inside a selector. So entity adapter is the one which provides us built-in methods which we use inside a reducer function to perform CRUD operation, and it is the one which provides us the built-in methods to be used inside a selector. So some of the built-in methods which this entity adapter provides, which we can use inside a reducer function to perform CRUD operation are add one when you want to add a single entity to the collection, add many when you want to add multiple entities to a collection, set one when you want to add or replace a single entity, set all when you want to replace the entire collection with a new set of entities, and remove one when you want to remove a single entity by its ID. All this we will see practically in our coming lectures. But apart from these five methods, the entity adapter also provides more methods to perform CRUD operation from a reducer function. So these are few examples of entity adapter methods which we can use inside a reducer function. So as you can see here, without entity adapter, if we have to update a state, let's say we want to add a new course to the courses state, we will have to write that logic manually. Here, let's say we are handling add course success action, and for that we are passing a callback function which is going to receive the current state as well as the payload of that action. So what we are doing here is we are returning a new state, and in that state we are extracting all the properties of the current state, and we are just updating the courses state, and there in the courses array we are adding a new course object. So this logic we have written manually, but when we use entity adapter, if we have to perform the same operation using entity adapter, all we have to do is we have to use this add one method, and to that we have to pass the entity which we want to add and the current state. So here we are making a single adapter call, and this will make sure that a new state is returned from within this reducer function, and it will also make sure that it does not mutate the previous state, and it also makes sure that this new course gets added to the courses entity. So just in one line of code, we have made sure that we return a new state instead of mutating the original state, and the new entity object gets added to the entity dictionary. So this is one advantage which we get when we use NgRx entity. Then entity adapter also provides some selector methods. So in NgRx entity, an entity selector is again a pure function that retrieves specific piece of data from your entity state. So when we use NgRx Store, it provides create selector and create feature selector utilities for creating the selectors. And the entity adapter provides a set of pre-built optimized selectors specially designed for working with normalized entity structure. So these are the four built-in methods which entity adapter provides as a selector method. You can use this select all selector method to select all the entities as an array. You can use select entities method when you want to select the entities as a dictionary, as a key value pair. You can use this select IDs to select all the IDs of the entity. And you can use this select total selector to select the total count of the entities. So these are the four built-in methods which you can use inside a selector to select an entity state. And we will see this practically in our coming lectures. So in summary, NgRx Entity is a specialized tool within the NgRx ecosystem that shines when you are dealing with collections of data that have unique identifiers. This is important that each data should have a unique identifier, because that unique identifier will be used as a key, and which requires frequent CRUD operations. So for example, when we have course entity, it requires a frequent CRUD operation. So for that, we can use NgRx entity. If we have posts entity or user entity or products entity, these also requires frequent CRUD operation. So for that also we can use NgRx entity. But if we have a state like is loading or counter, these states does not require any CRUD operation. So for that, we don't need to use NgRx entity. And when we use NgRx entity, it significantly reduces the boilerplate, it improves the performance through normalization, and it promotes a consistent and maintainable code base. So this was a very high level overview of NgRx entity and what advantage does it provide. From the next lecture, let's see how we can use NgRx Entity in our NgRx application practically. This is all from this lecture. If you have any questions, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.